So that brings us to this topic of recurrence prevention. If you give me the next slide on that. And hey, Adam, may I ask you, I've got my water bottle in there. I'm getting a little parched here talking. All right. So we're going to talk about in recurrence prevention, the 5 types of moisture, EnviroGuard passive moisture control solutions, and we're going to go demonstrate this in just a little bit, installation best practices and quality control, and Adam's going to help us with that. He actually has a background in the painting and coatings application markets, like a career in that. So I might give you a little bit of information, but he's probably going to give you a whole lot of information as to why a lot of these standards are so vital to the success of your, thank you, passive moisture control program. And then we're going to talk about maintenance agreements and why they're essential for the long term of your business. So let's go ahead and get started with 5 types of moisture. All right, the first one is bulk moisture. I'm going to flip over here for a second. So let's talk about what bulk moisture is by definition. Bulk moisture is water flowing directly into the building envelope through gravity or air pressure. Okay, gravity might be just something like you've got a hole or some sort of void in your foundation wall, and as a result of a downspout that just terminates at the ground, water builds up around the foundation. That foundation comes, that moisture comes directly into the foundation. Air pressure may be you've got gaps and voids and things like that, like let's say around your soffits and roof line and that sort of thing. And now air pressure is pushing that moisture up into those areas. Let's talk about how we solve it. So bulk moisture is best solved by systems that direct water away from buildings, right? We could, put a leader on those downspouts and things and move water away from the foundation. Proper flashings. This is a big one, right? Most of the time when we see water intrusions, bulk water intrusions, it's a flashings failure. Caulking, of course, that interfaces with that, and improper door and window installations, right? If we correct those things, most of the time, we're going to probably solve 95% of all of our bulk moisture issues. Next slide. Now, the way that we put this together is from bulk water intrusion, now you tend to get what's called capillary action. This is when wicking moisture moves from areas of elevated moisture content to areas of low moisture content. In my example, right, you've got water that flows through that foundation wall. Now, what does that hit? Well, that hits it wicks up the foundation wall itself. Maybe it wicks into the ground, right? That's on the other side of it. Maybe we're talking about a crawl space environment, or if it's a basement, into the slab, right? Now we've got moisture sitting in those areas that's elevated, right? High moisture content. So that's the definition of capillary action. How do we stop it? The use of capillary breaks, which are impermeable materials, air spaces, and damp-proofing materials that prevent absorption. This is one area that we get very involved with, as you'll see today, from exterior all the way through interiors. Stopping capillary action is a big part of what we do. And X4, which we'll talk about first and foremost when we get to solutions, is a big piece of that everyone should be adding to their sales. Next slide. Now we've got air transported moisture. What's the definition? Water vapor that moves into or through a building by both uncontrolled sources, wind, stack effect, and controlled sources like fans and air handlers. So now we've got that capillary action that moved that higher moisture content area into the lower moisture content, your slab, your foundation wall. What happens? It evaporates. Now that begins to build up in this atmosphere, and we begin to get some things like condensation forming, or we get transfer of that moisture in and through that building at this point in time, which begins to build moisture content into other areas and into other materials. How do we solve that? Keeping moisture outside the building through sealing against infiltration, ductwork, air pressure balancing, and the HVAC system, the proper use of exhaust fans, right? These things are all linked to one another. So when we're going in to do our assessment These are the kinds of things that we're looking for. These are the causes, right, of moisture issues in a building envelope. Next slide. So now we talk about vapor diffusion, right? I said one leads to the next. What's the definition? When the vapor pressure differential overcomes the permeability of the material that its moisture is passing through, right? We've evaporated. We've got maybe some condensation forming in areas, moisture building in other surfaces throughout a building. And now we've got this vapor pressure differential that is forcing moisture into and through materials. How is it best solved? With vapor retarders used in roofing, in walls, and below slabs and over the ground foundation, right? That's another type of passive moisture control. And next, final slide. Condensing moisture. Right? What's the definition? Moisture that forms on and absorbs into surfaces from reaching dew point, right? And let's look at the solutions for this. Thermal breaks that avoid hitting dew point, impermeable materials that prevent moisture absorption, and air movement that regulates temperature, right? All very simple for us to understand, all very simple for us to employ, but we've got to be paying attention during the initial assessment to list all of these conducive conditions, right? All 5 of these types of moisture are conducive conditions that are feeding the problem. And in context of today, the mold issue, right? Mold doesn't start by itself. It takes moisture. And these are the 5 areas that you have to pay attention to when doing an assessment to know not only where to cure it remedially, but how to cure it from a recurrence prevention standpoint. Next slide. That brings us into about 12 different moisture controls I want to share with you today. Wind-driven rain and freeze-thaw damage control. And just because you're in the Southeast or you're, in Texas or something like that, doesn't mean that you don't need this. In fact, you're going to find that a lot of those areas, wind-driven moisture is a huge issue for you, and it would go a long way for you to understand Ryland testing and how to advise your customers on preventing rain-driven and moisture-driven issues due to wind. But if you are in the Northeast, you are in the Midwest, or someplace that you see a lot of freeze-thaw damage, then this is doubly going to help you so that you don't have expanding and contracting ice that begins to damage brick and mortar, stone and mortar, aggregates, all of these sorts of things. We've got finished surface protection that we're going to talk about, foundation efflorescence, foundation block filling and seepage control, attic passive moisture controls, post remediation encapsulations, basement and crawl space passive moisture controls, priming and soot and odor sealing, and clean odor sealing. I threw those in there because it's really important for us to talk about the difference between a breathable product and a non-breathable product. And then we'll talk about construction structural protection, maintenance in inaccessible spaces, and disaster response moisture control. So the first one, we're talking about wind-driven rain and freeze-thaw control, and this is done with X4. This is one of those impermeable materials that doesn't change the way a building breathes, but is applied directly to brick and mortar, stone and mortar, aggregates, ephes, stucco, all of these surfaces, or incorporated into paints to allow so that when moisture hits it, it immediately beads up and runs off, right? We're just stopping that moisture in its tracks from ever becoming a bulk moisture intrusion problem or anything downstream of bulk moisture. It starts with X4. And like I said, we've got the tools and the know-how to help you add this service to what you do so you can pre-measure how much moisture is impacting the building envelope currently, and then you can do even test areas and measure a day or two later exactly what to expect from a moisture control recurrence prevention solution like X4. So think about from the top down on a building, whether we're talking residentially with chimneys, right, where moisture intrusion becomes a big problem, down to the entire outside surface of a home or a commercial building where moisture intrusion can sit up there and create a lot of those deterioration problems, all the way down to exposed foundations, right, where you might have a foundation that's been parged or something like that, but nevertheless, moisture's moving through that and you see seepage coming through the other side, right? That is where you've got that migration of moisture from outside to inside. All of that is a perfect example of why X4 is a product that should be in your rotation and you should be making a part of your services. And if you, again, are familiar with our certified program, one of the things that we do is we go a step further in that to teach a basic sales process. Shouldn't even use the word basic, to teach a great sales process so that when you get to the second stage of the sales process and the third stage, your customer goes, wow, I didn't even know you offered this service, and yes, I would like to employ that. And that is a major differentiator in how you're perceived as compared to your competitor who's only selling remediation, and maybe just remediation where the problem tends to exist in the first place. They're not looking at it holistically like we are here. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about interiors. We're nearing the end of summer right now. Maybe some people are saying, unfortunately, we're nearing the end of summer right now. Nevertheless, as we get inside, all of these surfaces that we all touch, right? These are areas, and if you will, breeding grounds for bacteria, viruses, cross-contamination of all sorts of things, right? Primarily bacteria and viruses. And this is a solution that's built with an EPA-registered antimicrobial to bond to surfaces, right? So that we can do everything from treating carpets to treating desks and tabletops and things like that, walls. What are other touch points? Fixtures, right? We go into the bathroom and think about all the fixtures that we touch in there, door handles and all these sorts of things. All of those areas are considered touch points, which is why we call the product touch point, right? So just think about everything that we come in contact with around offices and in homes and daycare centers and nursing homes and hospitals and hotels. We could go on, right? Institutions, municipalities, all of these indoor areas could benefit from the use of touch point. Gyms, as I've mentioned here, restaurants, all of these areas could be great clients. And we're going to start building very soon a campaign, a full-fledged marketing and sales campaign to assist you so that if you want to move services indoors for the winter, if you really want to kind of supercharge your sales going into fall and winter, this is going to be a great service for doing so. Next slide. Foundation efflorescence, right? Big topic. Some people just say, well, it's just ugly. We just need to get rid of it. Not a big deal. But I would say different, right? What is efflorescence? Efflorescence is calcium hydroxide that is water soluble. Well, what's calcium hydroxide? Well, calcium hydroxide levels are very high in things like concrete block, preformed concrete, those types of areas. So what happens here? Well, let's talk about wind-driven rain again, right? We've got wind driving at a surface, or we've got a subterranean foundation where the positive side, of course, is up against water, up against moisture, right? We've got failures, and especially older systems all the time. That moisture wicks through those substrates via capillary action, comes out the other side, and it's dragging that calcium hydroxide with it. Why? Because it's water soluble, right? Meaning that it dissolves in water and it redeposits on the negative side of the wall. Why is that a problem? Those are solids coming out of a foundation wall, gradually creating a more porous foundation and gradually weakening that foundation. X4 is a product that converts that calcium hydroxide into calcium silicate. And more importantly, it stabilizes the wall by filling all of those voids and creating an insoluble compound, namely calcium silicate, that now when water comes through that wall, can't drag that calcium hydroxide in the first place to the other side. It's no longer calcium hydroxide, meaning it's permanent. It's a permanent chemical reaction, okay? So this we can solve immediately. So if you've got customers and you're doing basement business and crawl space business and things like that, EnviroSeal should be a part of every service that you're offering. Next slide. Now we go from that into foundation block filling and seepage control. The number one reason that a waterproofer on the negative side of a wall will fail over time is actually efflorescence, right? Notice we're moving down these in order of like addition, right? So if we're talking about those crawl spaces in those basements, how do you stop that from failing? The majority of the time, you stop the efflorescence issue first. Now you block, fill, and seal for seepage control with masonry guard. And typically, you want a white product so it really brightens those areas up, and levels those surfaces out. And masonry guard was built to do that. In fact, it resists up to 23 psi of hydrostatic pressure. If we have to go beyond that, we've got a system that we're introducing shortly that can be for positive and negative side. It's more expensive, of course, because it's a three-part system. But if you need something that is just seepage control, masonry guard is probably your first step. Next slide. Now we get into areas of attic passive moisture control. And right now this says clear guard. It's really max guard clear. You'll notice that we reorganized things probably starting at the beginning of the year, and we brought the max guard line down into max guard white, max guard clear, max guard blackout, things like that. You'll still see some remnants here and there, but nevertheless, for attic solutions, because they're typically so tied to real estate transactions, having a clear product that you can see when it goes on the surface as white, but that dries down to a matte, natural finish is why we recommend clear guard. What's important about it? Well, because attics, whether we're talking about summer or wintertime months, are so susceptible to hitting dew point repeatedly and driving that moisture content up in surfaces, we need to have something that prevents that moisture content from re-elevating. So clear, I need to say this properly, MaxGuard Clear is the product that after remediation, you want to apply to all those surfaces. So if it is a real estate transaction, nobody says, well, what was the problem, right? You don't want something pigmented in there in a real estate transaction, specifically the attic, okay? So MaxGuard Clear is, it's not the only place to use it, but it's primarily where we see that passive moisture control being used for all the things I just listed. Next slide. All right, post remediation encapsulation. Now think interior to the building envelope, right? We've demoed out of space, we've remediated it, we've got open, joist bays, we've got open wall cavities and all these sorts of things. What product are you going to choose? My suggestion is go to the Safeguard line, right? These products are all in that range of, I think $205 to $235 per 5-gallon pail. You don't need the high solids level of the MaxGuard line to manage moisture 24/7, 365. You need something so that because you're in a plumbing chase and occasionally you hit dew point in those areas, if moisture and condensation occur, you've got something to prevent against a mold reformation problem, right? So this is the same technology, just not as high solids, that allows you to have the kind of marry up the right price point with all those areas inside the building envelope. And when I say inside, I mean all those areas adjacent to what is going to be conditioned. So that the top of the subfloor from a basement or crawl space on up, if it's a conditioned crawl space or if it's a conditioned basement, use it in there as well. If it's unconditioned, go MaxGuard on those sorts of things. Just like if you're in attic space, right? It's an unconditioned attic, which most are, go to the MaxGuard Clear side of things there and let everything below that attic space be your Safeguard line. Okay, Safeguard is available in a number of different pigmentations. Yes, it's available in white. It's available in semi-transparent, specifically for all of your inspectors so that they can see that remediation was done properly, right? Visibly clean and dust-free, but they can also see that, that there is something on the surface. And then we have a new product in the mix called Safeguard Blue. That product is a blue pigment to everything, so it's very visible. So if you're using it for marketing efforts, Safeguard Blue might be the product that you want to choose there. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about crawl spaces and basements. This is where we've seen MaxGuard White sell the most, because again, people want to brighten up those areas and have white walls, white joists, if you will. Some people like it, some people don't. It's up to you. We do have MaxGuard Clear for that reason. But if you want to really brighten things up, then MaxGuard White is the way to go for unconditioned spaces. Okay, basements, attics, crawl spaces, and again, only attics if the white pigmentation isn't going to be a problem. Next, speaking about ceilings, not attics necessarily, but ceilings. Most of the time when we go into commercial spaces, you're going to look up and notice that those ceilings are black or pretty close to black. It's actually a very, very dark gray. In that case, that's why we offer MaxGuard Blackout. So if you need something that's going to resist condensation where the air is warmer and more moist, like high up areas that are 12, 15, 20, 30 feet, and warm air rises and creates condensation, then MaxGuard Blackout is probably the product that you're looking for. Next one. That brings us to this other area of not moisture control, but odor sealing. Now, let's stop here for a second and talk about particle sizes. We've got a really great blog that came out this year, all about odor sealing. In fact, if you go into our website and just keyword search like odor seal or something like that, or non-breathable, for example, you're going to come to that blog post. And what we talk about in there is the size of things like odor particles that tend to be something like 0.005 to 1 micron in size. Okay, so keep that in your head, like 0.005, 1 micron in size. Now, what you should be doing is marrying up the particle size of the coating or sealant with the particle size of the problem. In this case, we're talking about odor. So let's talk about acrylics for a second. You've probably all had failures by using something like a Kills when it comes to odor. Why is that? A Kills is an acrylic product. What's the particle size of acrylic? It is 125 to 175 microns in size. Think of it like this. So this little chip that I have right here is our, maybe you can't see that. This little chip right here is our odor particle, and this is our acrylic. Let me grab another one of these. Should have brought like a basketball or something like that. Right. These are going to sit in here side by side with one another. Okay. And what am I trying to illustrate here? If this little chip is our odor particle, this little chip passes very easily right between that acrylic, right? It's great. Acrylics are great for managing moisture from coming in from the positive side and making their way through the coating. They'll also allow for vapor release, which is why they're breathable in the first place. But for odor sealing, you don't want that. You want something that's going to marry up in terms of size. So that's why you have so many failures. If you've ever done odor sealing with a product like Kills before, it's just not the right product. All right, so then let's talk about something else, like a shellac-based product. What's the problem with shellac? Well, shellac is in this area of about 5 microns, I think, to about 15 microns in size. It's better, right? It's better. It's not perfect. You're going to capture a lot of odor particles going through it, because some of those particles do get up to, like I said, 1 micron in size. You're going to capture and collect a lot of those on the surface, but you're still going to get some passing through. What's the problem? Well, it varies wildly in terms of price, because it's attached directly to a very natural bug excrement. What's another problem? They're typically always a solvent-borne or what is it, like an oil-based product, which brings along with it issues of cleanup, right? You got to clean up with a solvent at that point in time, which is flammable. And then they have a high fume index to them, right? You don't want fumes when you're working in and around, employees and general public and things like that. So about 3 different problems there, and they kind of work. They're pretty good. All right, so where do we go to next? We go to our VaporLock vinyl-based products. Vinyl, as a particle size, is about 0.0005 to to 1 micron in size. It matches up perfectly for odor. It is the ideal water-based system to give you all the benefits of almost zero fumes, right? Clean up with water and odor sealing all at the same time. With a price point, by the way, and we're going to go into some estimating in a little while here, with a price point that doesn't fluctuate and that's very affordable for the service that you're rendering. Okay. So that's Vapor Lock White. It makes it white too, right? It primes surfaces and things like that. So if you're going to paint over it, you can do that. But then you get into clear odor sealing. So let's take an example of you don't have soot, alligatoring, anything like that that's that's damaged the surface. You just have a clean surface that's impacted by odor. Now we can just reseal those surfaces instead of having to reprime and repaint with Vapor Lock Clear. Okay, that's the case. That's the use case for that. Or again, if you're going into attics and you need a product that's clear, that's going to be natural looking on the surface, and you don't want to shout problem was here, then Vapor Lock Clear again for that. Okay, next product. Let's talk about new construction framing. Now, I mentioned Safeguard Blue. Okay, ultimate solution when you have a lumber yard, and I should have both of those on this slide, by the way. When you have a lumber yard mold problem that then you move into remediation, what do you want to do? You want to go Safeguard Blue to prevent any kind of mold reformation on those surfaces. Okay. In fact, I will argue this with myself right now. I shouldn't have Fortify in here. Okay, we should be talking about Safeguard Blue exclusively in that application, because lumberyard mold is a huge problem for builders, whether they be residential builders or whether they be tract builders or multifamily builders. And we need to focus on Safeguard in that situation and having a high enough solids content to manage both moisture and mold regrowth throughout the construction process, right? Because remember, when you go from the sticks to erecting, walls and things like that, now you got to dry it in. You came to the table from the lumberyard with a mold problem. Hopefully it's been remediated, but now we need something that in a dry-in situation, because all this moisture is going to be coming out of that wood as it dries over time, and potentially rebuilding moisture content and another mold problem. That's why we've got to have something as sturdy as Safeguard, particularly Safeguard Blue, but it could be semi-transparent or white. We just know that Safeguard Blue is really more loved by the builder community for this application. We'll go to the next slide. Now, when you get into maintenance in inaccessible spaces and you need something that is let's talk about this, is imperfect, is an imperfect solution, but nevertheless something that is going to give you year in and year out activity, but you can't access it without ripping up a floor or something like that. A combination of, and we're not talking about this today, but Dutreon fumigation on the front side to mitigate spores and hyphae and things like that in a fumigated treatment, followed by fogging a solution of Fortify at a 2-to-1 ratio. It's a concentrate, right? So 2 parts water to 1 part Fortify into a space gives you about the best that you're going to get in terms of mitigation of spore and hyphal growth, along with protection on those surfaces. Okay, so think of this as the imperfect solution, but nevertheless a helpful solution to especially inaccessible spaces. And then the next one. If you are a storm chaser, or if you are around areas where storms are a thing, Florida, the Southeast, Texas, places like that, and hurricane season is a regular part of your thought process and repertoire, you are probably moving very quickly from one building to the next, and you don't always get down to dry standard perfectly every single time. This gives you a great product at a 9-to-1 ratio that you can apply with any device that you have, right? I think 9-to-1 is correct. I'll check that in the label, but it might be 2-to-1, it might be 9-to-1. I can't recall. In any case, think about how thin you get with equipment. You've got pump sprayers over here. You've got an airless sprayer over there. Maybe you've got a BTM system, right? All of these different tools. What if you could use any device, anytime to apply that product kind of before you pack up and leave and move on to the next house to make sure that you don't get regrowth in those homes or in those buildings that you just dried out, right? That is where Fortify comes in. We're going to do some numbers on this when we get there in just a little bit. Next slide. Okay, so this is where we want to bring in Phoenix products. Okay, this is a brand of ours that started as a roofing brand. And if you look at this right here, right, these are just the regular things that are going on in a building's life cycle, right? You've got maintenance going on all the time. And perhaps you start with renovations, and then there's maintenance involved, and then there's construction involved, and remediation might be required, and then there's more maintenance to occur, and then there's restoration needs and things like that. Phoenix will allow us to, with EnviroGuard, capture all of that business together. So we're not just talking about roof coatings anymore. Now we're talking about the ability to go in and seal from the positive side of the foundation wall, create a waterproofing system, a three-part membrane subterranean, or a three-part membrane on the negative side of the foundation wall that is elastomeric in nature and is very tough and resilient. Think of it as being almost feeling like a rubberized version of a spray-in bed liner, and that's pretty quickly how you get to the toughness and resiliency of this product. Go forward from that. What if we could replace things like quote unquote vapor barriers like Tyvek and things like that on the outside with a seamless system that doesn't flap in the wind every time that there's a storm, right? There's a million, there's about 4 or 5 uses for this from the outside in that prevents that bulk moisture intrusion that leads to capillary action from ever taking place in a building. So look for big things and ways of offering Phoenix products to your same clientele. So as you're talking to your flippers and your investors and all of these different opportunities that you have out there, we can kind of start from the inside out or the outside in. A lot of times with this type of stuff, you're talking about stopping moisture ingress in the first place before remediation takes place. So we can help you on both fronts.